Here, we have a session on alternative and complementary treatment in psychiatry by Dr. Shivavarma Valpari. I would like to welcome Dr. Shivavarma Valpari over the stage. I would like to welcome the chairpersons, Dr. S. Rajkumar and Dr. G. Vishwanathan, sir. Dr. Rajkumar, sir, is currently working as a professor and HOD in Department of Psychiatry in Balaji Medical College and Hospital. And about Dr. Vishwanathan, sir, is currently practicing at Sharavana Hospital in Narmedu, Madurai, and he is well known for bipolar disorder and depression. Over to you, sir.
Morning, everybody. Sir, today's topic is alternative and complementary medicine. This is delivered by Shivaram Valpari. He is a well-known psychiatrist from NIMHANS, Bangalore. He is a vice chairperson of IPS Task Force on Mind Biomedicine 2018 to 2020 and pioneering work done in yoga and mental health, and received the prestigious doctorate in science in yoga. First head of the Department of Integrative Medicine at NIMHANS, the first such department to be set in the Institute of National Importance in India. Thank you for this opportunity. Sir, hand it over to you.
Thank you, sir. Very happy to be here and very happy to have Dr. Ramakrishnan also here. He was the reason I'm here. And of course, we have been working in NIMHANS on, I would not really like to call it as complementary and alternative, but rather refer to the term as integrative. Because what is complementary, what is alternative depends on your viewpoint. This was brought home to me very strongly by a group from Brazil who visited NIMHANS. They had seen our publications in yoga and they had come and they said, how is it that you call Ayurveda and yoga as complementary in your own country? You are the people who gave Ayurveda and yoga to the world, and how can you call it as alternate in your own country? You know, we find it very funny is what they said, and you know, that started us thinking. And what I'm going to talk about is how to integrate our own traditional treatments into the concept of psychiatric practice here. As we all know, we have been discussing that medicines are not a cure-all. In fact, I was very interested in the previous session, Dr. Suresh, and he also brought up a very important question, Dr. Rajkumar, about what does the patient do to get himself or herself better? What is the role of the psychiatrist? We are not God, we are just a doctor, and how to empower them. We know that there are many limitations in the medical reductionist approach, but we cannot overcome it by ourselves. We need the patient to do something for herself or himself. And this is now where Ayurveda and yoga have come in, give options to the person. And there are a lot of lines of evidence which show that when you combine a modern treatment with a Ayurveda or yoga, the results are much better than either giving one of them alone. So the important things we have to understand is integration does not mean believing everything an Ayurveda person or a yoga person says. It has to be backed by modern research methodology, but you take them into, you study it, and if it works, why not? You know, the boundary between what we call as biological treatment and psychological treatments are not actually as strong as we think. There has been recent evidence, for example, cognitive behavior therapy can produce changes in brain functioning, including functional changes in the MRI. No, it's a purely so-called psychological treatment, but it is producing biological treatment. So everything is ultimately biological. Food is, you know, you change the food that you eat, something changes, like gut microbiome changes, your brain changes, depression may get better. You eat something else, depression may get worse. This is also biological. You talk to a friend, you talk to a counselor, you feel better, your brain chemistry changes, again biological. So ultimately the final common pathway is biology, but what starts the cascade need not be biological based. But we have to combine this to the benefit of the patient, and a better definition of optimal health I have not been able to find than this, which comes from the Bhagavad Gita, which says yuktahara viharasya yukta chestasya karmasu yukta swapnava bodhasya yogo bhavati dukkha. For a person who is moderate in all things, following the yogic path will lead him to overcome all his difficulties. It's very difficult to find something better than this. And we know now that physical illness and what we call as mental illness are very much tied together. A simple example of post-stroke depression. People who have post-stroke depression are much more likely to die early than people who do not have. And people who recover well are the people who are not depressed, or at least get treatment for the depression. Same thing with diabetes. In fact, the Endocrinological Society of India has, the Mind Body Medicine Task Force of the Indian Psychiatric Society, we conducted a joint thyroid, I correct the thyroid. But the patient comes and says, I am not the same person I was before. You might have replaced my thyroid, you are saying the TSH is normal, but I am not what I was. There is something not okay with me. And then he says, what do? I mean, I don't know what to do. And this is where the mental health aspect of physical illnesses also comes in. What we have to understand, many of us are doctors here, or people who have studied the human brain. We were taught in MBBS that the brain is a very static organ. Something damaged, very difficult to repair, unlike the skin where we cut and we know tomorrow it will be all right. But recently we have changed this perspective a lot. The brain has a terrific ability to change its function, if not the structure, which a computer cannot do as yet. Maybe 100 years later it might, but right now the brain has an ability to shift function from one part of the brain to another part and carry on the functioning which no computer till now has been able to do. So a computer, you have to just replace the part, and this is very important. And we used to talk about areas, Broca's area, that area, this area, Wernicke's area. Now we no longer talk of areas, we talk of circuits. And there is a circuit for everything. There is a circuit for happiness, there is a circuit for sadness, there is a circuit for seizures. And depending on the circuit that you use the most, it becomes more and more efficient. This is the real truth of the brain. And you have to be very careful what is the circuit you are wanting to use all the time. You are you use your sadness circuit a lot, you become very good at being sad. You use your happiness circuit, you are more good at being happy. So you have to be very careful what circuit you use, and especially our patients. And this comes from Donald Holding Hebb's work. There's a very famous law in neurology which says neurons that fire together, wire together, and neurons that lose their link are out of sync. So basically what you train, say for example, there are primarily two kinds of abilities we have. One is, for example, cycling, swimming. Once you learn, you never forget. That is implicit memory. That is because the circuits involved are very strong. You all only need to do it once. Whereas other things, I see Dr. Rajkumar today, 2 years later I see him. I have seen him, but I don't know what is his name. That is semantic memory. That has to be trained. I'm in touch with Dr. Rajkumar for next 2 years, I will know who he is. If I'm not in touch, I may not remember. So that we need to train. So happiness, sadness are luckily for us belong to the second category. You can train yourself to be happy. You can train yourself to be a positive person. It's a great thing that we can do as human beings. One example is myself and Dr. Gangadhar went and met the Dalai Lama near Coorg. He has a place where he comes and stays 3-4 months. He spent around 40 minutes with us. It's a wonderful example of a person who has trained himself to be positive no matter what. The security is so strict. Dr. Gangadhar told me, I have met Vajpayee when he was the Prime Minister. That was nothing compared to Dalai Lama's security because they're afraid of him being assassinated. They won't even let you take a paper inside. He meets 200 people a day. But he spent 40 minutes with us and he was so positive, he was so childlike, he made fun of himself, He made fun of other people. He was so jovial. At the age of 83, his cognitive ability was fantastic. So this is because he has trained himself by meditating, by being positive all the time. He also came to NIMHANS, and in NIMHANS actually he spoke for half an hour, and then next 1 hour he just took questions. And like you, somebody stood up and said, "You are the Dalai Lama. You are such a great person. How are you so humble?" And he said, "Let me tell you a very simple thing. If I think I am a great person, I am the Dalai Lama, I become one. If I think I am like all of you, I have 8 billion brothers and sisters, you tell me which one is better." Such a simple person, I really could see how he has won the Nobel Prize. And when you come to training, for example, in pilots, they follow something called the 10,000 hour rule. A person has to do something for 10,000 hours, then he is considered master. You wake him up at 12 o'clock in the night, he will still land the aeroplane. Whereas if you don't have that much practice, you may get panicky, you may not know what to do. So they follow the 10,000 hour rule very strictly. We also should do that. Why do we need to train ourselves so much for medical science surgeons? Simply because unless you do it, you may know all the theory in the world, but doing it is a different thing altogether. What Dr. Ramakrishnan was talking about, how you explain to the patient, that you cannot get from, Kaplan and Sadak. You have to learn how to do it, break the news to the person. And here Daniel Kahneman's concept of system 1 and system 2 is very important. He's a Nobel Prize winner in economics who says we have 2 primary systems. One is the system 1, which is a sort of instinctive fight-flight response. Somebody tries to attack me, I hit him back or I escape. Unfortunately, we use that even in other situations where it is not required. System 2 is the rational, logical way of reacting. Suppose somebody tells me something, some patients get angry and shouts at you. We are psychiatrists, we know we should not react. So we use this logically. The same thing happens in your own house. Your wife shouts at you. We don't use that. We immediately react back, or we shout, or my kid is not behaving properly. What we do in the job, why we cannot do in the house? It's a matter of training. So if you gradually use more of system 2, you will become a more logical, rational person. That's what he says in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a wonderful book if people want to read. And this is another recent thing that we have learned. We used to again think that neurogenesis, we know that till 6 or 7 years of age, our neurons reach that maximum limit. After that, it's just down. So from 30 years of age, we start losing neurons in the brain. We lose more or we lose less, depends on, of course, of many factors. But there is recent evidence to show that even at the age of 60, new neurons can be formed. Not everywhere. A couple of areas like hippocampus, which is the most important thing for memory, even at 60, it can be formed, and we have ourselves have shown it in a study. What are the ways to promote this process, renew our brains? One of the things is yoga, which even positive psychology people, Csikszentmihalyi has spoken in his book Flow. He says yoga is the most systematic way of producing this flow or in the zone experience. Of course, when I say yoga, it always involves meditation. There is nothing called yoga without mindfulness. There is just exercise. There is always meditation. For example, Iyengar yoga, they don't teach you meditation separately. The asana itself has to be meditative. When you are doing an asana, you should be comfortable. So asana definition is Thiram Sukham Asanam. It's not complicated asana. You need to be comfortable and maintain it for a period of time. That itself is meditation. Intermittent fasting is a recent fad in the West, but it has always been practiced by our Jains and other monks. They don't eat after sunset. You align with the circadian rhythm. You don't eat after the sun goes down. You give time for the body to do other things rather than digestion. That's one way which has been shown. And till now in medical science, the only thing which has been shown to prolong life is cutting calories. Nothing else has been shown to prolong life. Definitely, cutting calories does. So as you age, take care of your body, eat less, keep fit, you will definitely live longer. Having novel experiences. You want to learn guitar at 65, please do. You want to learn Carnatic music at 70, please do. You want to do Sudoku, you want to learn computers. All these novel experiences rewire your brain, renew your brain, learning new skills. And when I say reading here, you read something where you forget yourself. So you have to be so involved in the book that you forget yourself. It might be, a novel, it might be something else, but all these things renew our brain. And there are many misconceptions about yoga. The West has taken it to extremes. There is something called beer yoga, where you do yoga while drinking beer. There is doga, which it seems which you do yoga with your dog. I mean, they have taken it to ridiculous extents. But yoga is not primarily physical. If you read Patanjali Yoga Sutra, I'm sure Dr. Swami here would agree with me that it's such a small book. It has just 196 aphorisms, which are slokas, 2-line slokas. And nowhere it talks about a single asana. All these people who talk about Patanjali, many people don't know that all he talks about is the mind. So, in fact, Dr. Gangadhar often says that Bhagavad Gita is the philosophy of yoga. Patanjali is the manual of yoga. It's the technique, but it is psychological. All he talks about, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, is yoga. Not bending yourself into uncomfortable positions is not yoga. We have unfortunately made it look like only super fit people like Shilpa Shetty can do yoga. That's not really true. You can do yoga sitting in a chair, and the benefits for the mental health would be more than doing some complicated asana where you're straining yourself and getting body pain. It comes from our ancient Shaddarshanas. Yoga is one of the 6 Shaddarshanas, and Patanjali is considered as the pioneer of this. And this is something, if you look at the NIMHANS logo, for example, Dr. Govinda Swami, who was the first director of the All India Institute of Mental Health, was a renowned Sanskrit scholar, and he must have thought of it left time. He has put this Samatvam Yoga Uchyate from the Bhagavad Gita there, which is basically about renouncing attachment. This is part of Krishna's discourse to Arjuna, where he says, Yogastha Kuru Karmani Sangham Tyaktva Dhananjaya. Let go of attachment. Treat both success and failure as the same. And Rudyard Kipling, of course, much later in his poem, If, said the same thing. That if you can treat success and failure both as imposters, don't worry about them, then only you can really live life. Again, because of the modern way, we have neglected the other aspects of yoga. Asana and pranayama are very much in demand, but nobody thinks about yama, niyama, the rules of living. The remaining 4, the antaranga yoga part of it, is very difficult to achieve because we think that we are not able to do that. You don't need to do everything to get benefit, of course, but this is the true Ashtanga yoga. And even as a simple asana, Shirley Tellis and many other people have done research to show if you do an asana the way it is supposed to be done, the physiological effects sometimes are opposite to exercise. You are not doing yoga to increase your heart rate and get your up to 120 beats per minute, which you do in a gym. You are actually doing it, stretching the muscle to get a sense of relaxation, which doesn't happen in exercise. So that's very important to understand that yoga is not exercise. We have actually published a paper comparing yoga and exercise in the International Review of Psychiatry in 2016. This is a slide which I use in all my presentations, just to show that how you do something is as important, sometimes more important than what you do. As you may know, the person on the top is the famous B.K. Iyengar ji, who took yoga to the world. The person on the bottom, I don't know, of course, but it looks very similar. The effects next day morning are likely to be exactly the opposite. So, it looks very similar, but obviously it's a lot of differences. So you have to decide what you want from yoga for you or your patient. Do you want physical effects? Yes, of course, it can produce, you can get better flexibility, coordination, strength. But if you want mental effects, you have to do yoga mindfully, slowly, being able to, you might only do 15 minutes a day, no problem. Do it properly. Same thing because many patients, when we say yoga, oh my God, I can't do this, sir. It's too difficult. It involves a lot of complicated postures. No, that's not what we're talking about. You please come. We will teach you something that you can do comfortably. Why should our patients do yoga? Why should we do yoga? Very simple. There is now quite a lot of evidence to show that people who do meditative practices need not be the classical Ashtanga yoga. Their brains atrophy at a much lesser rate than people who do not. This is now incontrovertible evidence. There's no doubt at all. Multiple things. In fact, there has been shown that there are thicker cortex cortical areas in many people who do long-term meditation. MRI evidence is there. We ourselves did a small study in old age homes in Bangalore. Hari Prasad, one of our PhD students, did this study. We went to the old age home and taught yoga to a group of 60 people. 60 another people saying in the same areas, eating the same food in the same environment. Nothing, we didn't add anything. All of them were above 60. At the end of 6 months, cognition was definitely better in the group who did yoga. Not only that, as I will go on to show you later, there was actually a small increase in the size of the hippocampus in these people. Now, this is a remarkable thing. If a person at 65 can change his brain, what more do you want? This is a very recent study done on students at NIMHANS who are experiencing a lot of stress. Psychiatric residents, MPhil psychiatric social work, MPhil clinical psychology students. We did a small yoga program for them. And in fact, we were able to show that their stress levels improved quite a lot when they did a 15-minute module of yoga for 30 days. And the feedback they gave was that it improved their sense of mental health and well-being, which was the most important things for them. Now, coming to yoga for psychiatric disorders, if you look at a meta-analysis kind of thing, this is quite old one, and there are better ones which are in the process of being published, but the effect size you can see is really powerful for the overall effect of yoga. This is across all disorders. Let me go to depression. This is a meta-analysis again by Kramer et al. Holger Kramer is one of the people who has done a lot of meta-analysis. He was doing his PhD at the time in Germany. He's now the head of a department of integrative medicine in Germany. And what he has shown is that very clearly the yoga has evidence as a therapeutic ingredient in depression, either add on to medicine and in some cases a sole treatment. This was a famous study done by Dr. Janki Ramaiah and Dr. Gangadhar at NIMHANS, the first randomized control trial of yoga as a sole treatment in depression anywhere in the world, which was published in the Journal of Affective Disorders. What it showed is that yoga was as good as imipramine, but of course, ECT was far better. We know that ECT is the most potent treatment. This was done and published in 2000. We have repeated the study recently in a non-randomized pragmatic manner, giving the choice to patients. You want to take medicine, you want to take yoga, or both. And as you can see, yoga only was as good as medicines. And as you can imagine, the side effects, they did not have the side effects of the medicines. These are two recent papers outside of India using yoga as a sole treatment for depression. One in people with major depression, and one actually in patients who had suicidality. They in fact found that it improves suicidality quite a lot. So as usual, the West has taken our ideas and run ahead with it. We are still in the, go to ethics committee, people will ask questions. You're going yoga alone, how are you going to cover the insurance? Person may commit suicide. They are already doing it. We need to do this thing. This is exactly what the Dalai Lama told myself and Dr. Gangadhar. I am funding yoga studies in the US. What are you people doing? So that is what made us, look seriously at doing this kind of studies. And this is a recent PhD under my guideship, Dr. Aditi has done. And what she did was she took patients and only yoga as a sole treatment, and she has 22 patients she has done. Of course, this case series carries 6 of them, and she was actually able to pursue clinical improvement in all of them. Of course, we did a lot of other biochemical things, which I'm going to talk about later. Now, let us come to the other bugbear of psychiatrists, that is schizophrenia, the most difficult disorder that we treat. Again, we have been able to show that particularly negative symptoms, yoga works very well. There are now 4 studies from NIMHANS confirming this finding, one in collaboration with SCARF, Dr. Naren recently published. This was the first. Ganeshan Duraiswamy did his PhD, MD psychiatry thesis under Dr. Gangadhar. We published in the ACTA. This was a second study done by myself and Dr. Gangadhar, a funded study from Ayush. Again, negative symptoms, social occupational functioning got better. And these 2 studies were picked up by the NICE guidelines in the UK, which recommended yoga as a complementary treatment in schizophrenia for the first time in 2014. There is a UK Parliament group on yoga, which is still not there in the Indian Parliament. So they pick up these ideas from anywhere in the world and they immediately implement it. We are a little slow in that thing. This is a recent, what I was talking about, Naren in collaboration with SCARF confirmed this finding. As you know, replicability is a big issue in research. Anything, case studies, there are so many case studies, but are you able to replicate? He has indeed replicated and shown that particularly negative symptoms, yoga is a very good add-on. Mind you, I'm not saying that in patients with schizophrenia, you can take off medicine. Medicine is definitely necessary. It's an add-on to medicine. And very importantly, yoga seems to improve what is now the frontier for schizophrenia, social cognition, empathy. These are the things that yoga seems to improve. Not only does it improve social cognition, again, replicated study this is, this starts to happen at 1 month, persists till 6 months, and as we'll go on to show on later, there is a biological correlate to this. But how does all this happen? You learn yoga from a teacher, you imitate the teacher, you do the physical practice, and then you synchronize with the breath, and then you focus on the experience. This is the way that you learn. And this is important because if you might learn from YouTube, it's not as good as learning from a real person. That's something that's very important to know. But how does it happen? Simple thing, cortisol, which is a stress hormone in patients with depression, came down. This did not happen so much in people who are taking medicine. Why is this important? We know that, okay, we depressive episode, we give medicines, the patient gets better. 6 months later, what happens? They stop the medicine, they go back down. How to prevent them relapsing? That is where yoga and CBT, all these treatments come in. They can produce changes which make relapse less likely. Cortisol is just one of the indicators, and a very nice correlation between depression getting better, cortisol going down. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is a very important molecule. It's a marker of what we now call as neuroplasticity. This is the ability of the brain to renew itself or repair itself or change itself. BDNF is just a marker, and there is a conversion of pro-BDNF to mature BDNF, which this is the first study that we did. Naveen was a PhD student with myself and Dr. Gangadhar. What we showed is that regular yoga practices increase BDNF, which is known to be low in depression. As you can see, it was low, and then they did yoga, and then it came back almost to normal levels. Again, very nice correlation between BDNF going up, cortisol going down. So what it seems like is that yoga brings back the body to a situation where it can then take care of itself. That's the whole idea of doing yoga. And very interestingly, this is a recent Aditi study what we did. She is basically a biochemist by training, but then she learned yoga, did a course in yoga, and taught the yoga herself. What we were able to show is that in depression, what happens, the conversion of pro-BDNF to mature BDNF is impaired. So the body does not convert efficiently. And pro-BDNF is pro-apoptotic. It is dangerous for the cells. Whereas mature BDNF is very beneficial to the cells. What yoga seems to be able to do is to make this process more efficient so that you have more mature BDNF and less pro-BDNF. Maybe medicines also do it. The single biggest inducer of BDNF is ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. So nowadays, at the beginning of my psychiatry, I used to be very worried if a medical professional asked me about ECT, isn't it a very barbaric treatment? You're still using ECT. And now I'm so confident I can give them a 1-hour lecture on ECT simply because I know how it works. It induces neuroplasticity. There is a very good article by Dr. Andrade in 2010 Indian Journal of Psychiatry, which talks about the final common mechanism of antidepressant. He shows actually that all treatments for depression actually ultimately work through neuroplasticity. And yoga is just one more of those treatments. So like I said in the beginning, what is biological, what is psychological, there's not a very great difference between the two. And this is what we were able to show. This is in the process of being published. Similarly, in schizophrenia, social cognition gets better. How does it get better? Oxytocin, which is what is called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone, which is what binds the mother to the child. If a child cries, the mother is able to know, is it crying because it is in pain? Is it crying because it is hungry? Most other people don't know. They don't know that the child is crying. How does this happen? When people have children, mother's oxytocin goes up, and this links them to the child. Similarly, this links us to other people, love, empathy. Oxytocin is very important. And in patients with schizophrenia, this goes down. And so does the mirror neuron activity. Mirror neurons are neurons which enable us to understand other people's emotion without experiencing it ourselves. It's a very important thing because that is the basis of being human or even animal for that matter. If a child is crying, for example, all of us feel upset. Although it's not my child, I don't even know why the child is crying, we all feel upset. Why does this happen? Because of the mirror neurons. So that activity is reduced in schizophrenia, and we have shown that actually not only oxytocin level goes up, gene expression goes up, and mirror neuron activity becomes more after yoga. Similarly, GABA is a very important molecule, the most important inhibitory molecule in the brain. And again, GABA activity is very poor in patients with depression. And as this slide shows, a cortical silent period, which is a TMS measure of GABA. The left one on the left here is patients with depression. It's very low. The one on the extreme right, orange, is normal, where it is, that is where it should be. And the blue one is after yoga. The green ones are after walking. Didn't change very much. But after just 5 sessions of yoga, it started going back to normal. So that is the effect of yoga in patients with depression. This is a very simple study by Kalyani, who is the daughter of Dr. Gangadhar, who herself is a psychiatrist now. She did it as an MBBS student, where we showed what happens when you chant Om. Now, recently we have replicated this study and shown that it's not the Om that matters, it is the that vibratory sense that matters. We have replicated and shown that Brahmari, which is the humming breath, which is the sound made by a bee, is as good as Om. It need not be religious. It can be Amin, it can be Amen, doesn't matter. That component, that sound, is able to deactivate the limbic parts of our brain which control our most basic emotions, anger, lust, greed. These are controlled by the limbic system, and Om is able to, or is able to actually deactivate blood flow to that region, make it less active. This is the one I was talking about in elderly people and living in old age homes. There is actually a noticeable change in the size of the hippocampus after 6 months of yoga. It's a very wonderful finding because it gives us all hope. Dr. Suresh Kumar was talking about hope. Many people think that at 65, my life is done. There's no hope for me to change. Definitely it is possible. And this is another study which I was talking about in elderly yoginis, or rather ladies who are doing yoga for a long time. So one surprising thing in yoga research is highly overrepresented by females. You start a yoga class anywhere, 90% will be women. Why it is, I don't really know. In Australia, in fact, there is a paper published saying that yoga is seen as a non-manly activity. Oh, that's for women, that's not for men. Men should go to the gym and do things. I don't know what is the thing, but always we do appreciation courses at NIMHANS for our staff yoga. Most of them are women. But it's a good thing because if the woman learns yoga, the kids are more likely to do yoga. That's what we want, mothers to lead the way. So it's good. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's very strong evidence in women is there. This is a recent thing we did on schizophrenia. Before in yoga, what happens, and something called as default mode network, which is the state which when we are not focusing on something, our brain, we let our brain loose, we are not focusing. The default mode network, it's different in each person. But what happens in schizophrenia is that this mind wanders too much. The person cannot stick to one thought. And after yoga, we were able to show that the coherence actually gets better. And therefore, there is better ability to focus on one thought. So putting all these things together, I have put a model here of how yoga works in depression. What are the things that happen? So there is reduction in cortisol, increase in brain-derived neurotropic factor, improved event-related potentials, improved cortical modulation, and together it leads to both symptomatic changes and, of course, reduced risk of relapse. Similarly, in schizophrenia, it's a little different. There is oxytocin, there is mirror neuron system, and these lead to the changes that we see in social cognition. So this is a perfect example of integrative medicine because antipsychotics handle the positive symptoms, yoga handles the negative symptoms and social cognition. That is where it comes into integrative medicine. And of course, NIMHANS has been working on yoga for last almost 40 years in terms of research, but clinical application of yoga for patients came in 2007 with the starting of the NIMHANS Integrated Center for Yoga with the MDNAY. That corresponded with me coming back from Australia, so I was in the right place in the right time. Dr. Gangadhar was the one who really initiated it, and today it has grown into a department of integrative medicine. It was inaugurated, in fact, formally on this 10th by the Honorable Health Minister, and now we have full-fledged Ayurveda yoga set up in NIMHANS as a separate department. And yoga, as you can see, we have been, COVID, of course, brought down the numbers. Now we are back to close to 1,500 patients a month. We have developed specific yoga modules for various disorders, neurological and psychiatric. And recently we have put together a book published by the Indian Psychiatric Society and JP Publications called this Art and Science of Yoga in Mental and Neurological Disorders. It's available on Amazon. It puts together all our research work and the modules that we use. And this is a summary, the research work that we have been doing, particularly in yoga. So this is a slide which summarizes most of what I said. So always we look for a clinical finding and how it happens, because this is science. We need to know how something happens. So we have to find a biological correlate. We have been able to do it reasonably well for depression, schizophrenia, cognitive impairment, to some extent alcohol dependence. But in OCD and other disorders, OCD, one of my students has recently completed a PhD showing that OCD is yoga is a very valuable add-on for patients who are undergoing medication for OCD, and it reduces their stress and it makes them able to relax. We have to still find out the mechanisms. That's something that we have to still do. Coming to the last part of my talk, Ayurveda. This is a recent thing for me. I am not a Ayurveda doctor, but the person who really inspired me in this was Dr. Valiyathan. You might have heard of Dr. Valiyathan, who is the founder of the Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute in Kerala. He was the part of the team which made India's first indigenous heart valve. He's a cardiac surgeon, but he's such an inspiration because at the age of 62 or 63, he started reading about Ayurveda, and then he has translated Charaka, Sushruta, and Vagbhata's work and written English translation of that. He does not use Ayurveda medicines. He himself says that, but he has done wonderful work into the importance of Ayurveda and gut microbiome. For example, if I ask an Ayurveda doctor, whatever your symptoms, he will first start with your diet. What do you eat? How do you eat? What time do you eat? Do you eat it hot? Do you take it with water? Do you take it with milk? Everything is based on the gut because they believe that everything comes from the Agni, which is the digestive ability, and then only anything can happen in the body, good or bad. So he says if your digestive system is so good, you can eat poison and nothing will happen to you. If your digestive system is useless, you can eat the best food in the world, you will not get any benefit. You see B12 deficiency nowadays. Every single person, people eating non-vegetarian food have B12 deficiency. How is it possible? It's simply because absorption is not happening. We are not style was better. That is the simple explanation for this. So again, Ayurveda has been there in NIMHANS since I think almost 1959 as a unit of the CCRAS, but it was not under NIMHANS. Recently, we have integrated it and made it a department of NIMHANS itself. And we have done some work on Ayurveda. We are just starting to do more work now. Dr. Kishore, who is a professor of Ayurveda, has joined us as a faculty, and he's the first author of this paper. And we have looked at, for example, in depression, what they call as Vishada. Depression in Ayurveda is called as Vishada, and they have seen what happens. This is another one for anxiety disorder. So what we feel is that we should, in fact, Dr. Gangadhar says this, that we should not look at Ayurveda and yoga as competitors. a person has a mild anxiety disorder, maybe he doesn't need medication. Yoga may be all he needs, or just a suggestion of yoga and his diet may cure him. Doesn't happen, then the modern medicine comes in, modern medication comes in, psychotherapy comes in. Yes, all these things. But the basic can be yoga and Ayurveda. And this is a Lancet article looking at, for example, the Chinese have given so much importance to the traditional medicine that 40% of patients in China today take only their Chinese system of medicine across disorders. They also use allopathy, but in the remaining 60%. We should also become like that. We will be more self-sufficient. We have so many yoga and Ayurveda people. We are not using them in the right way because we fail to integrate them. Rather, we should work along with them. And this is what we're trying to do in the Department of Integrative Medicine. We've already started PhD, postdoctoral fellowship in integrative psychiatry, integrative mental health, which is for the Ayurveda stream. We have started MSc in yoga therapy this year in NIMHANS. 2022, we are going to start the MD Manas Roga, which is the MD psychiatry within Ayurveda. My ultimate dream is that we want to start an MD in integrative psychiatry, where a person with BAMS can come, person with MBBS can come, and both of them learn about the best of each other. So this is the dream. Of course, it will take a long time to do it, but hopefully we will be successful. And coming to the why, this perspective is important, for example, in disaster or crisis. If you look at, this is a very famous prayer, what is called as a serenity prayer. It is taught in most of the Christian convents that give us the courage to change what must be altered, serenity to accept what cannot be helped, and the insight to know the difference. It's attributed to Rinald Niebuhr, but it's actually much older. As you can see, Shantideva from Nalanda in the 8th century has said same thing. If there is a remedy, then why do you get upset? If there is no remedy, then what is the point of being sad about it? You do whatever is supposed to be done. So, for example, somebody with a psychiatric illness, cancer, you tell them that, look, this is the prognosis, but that doesn't mean that you can't do anything in your life. That's very important for them to know. So we have to accept what we can do rather than what we cannot do. There are so many things many of us cannot do. I want to become Roger Federer, I want to become Amitabh Bachchan. That's not possible. But there are many things that I can do, and that is what we should focus on, and that's important. So I would like this, to be my take-home message, that we need to integrate our Indian systems of healthcare along with the Western system. This because it delivers several benefits to the patient. After all, that's our ultimate aim. For example, in NIMHANS, in the integrative medicine OPD, what happens is that I, as a psychiatrist, myself, Dr. Kishore, and Dr. Hemant Bhargav, who is a MBBS person with a PhD in yoga, we three sit together and we see the patient. Because there are many models in India where there is co-treating approach. So there is a psychiatrist sitting in this room, there is Ayurveda person sitting in the next room, and yoga. Patient has to go to 3 people. It's not going to happen. Person does not have the time nor the money to see 3 people. It should happen at one go. So that is why the need for the integrated psychiatry medicine is going to come. We need to work together and do high quality research and publish so that people accept it as being scientific. Everything depends on proof of evidence. So we have to do that. Of course, most of the work done here is not done by me alone. We have collaborations both within and outside NIMHANS, but Professor D. Nagaraj and Professor B.N. Gangadhar are the people who really put us on this path, and the current team is carrying it forward. I'm very happy to have shared this with you. I'm a part of 2 departments of NIMHANS. I'm a part of course, of the Department of Psychiatry, but I'm also currently the head of the integrative medicine. So I have put both these departments here, and I hope what I said has been very useful for you. Thank you very much.
Can we have questions and comments, please?
I'm Dr. Murugappan, Chennai. It was a nice talk, nice presentation by Dr. Shivaram, and he covered the topic very extensively. And with reference to the effect of yoga on mind, it has been shown in several studies that lot of these advanced Tibetan monks, they exhibit gamma waves, which is not normally seen in ordinary people. It is only in advanced people we see that gamma waves. And gamma waves refer to the universal consciousness. Maybe the Dalai Lama you were referring to.
Yes.
It is only those kind of people, they have the universal consciousness of empathy with all others. And what is this? Again, see, yoga, and even the word yoga is always confused with yoga asanas.
Yes.
Most of these yogasana centers, they refer to yoga, whereas yoga is real in Ashtanga yoga, as Patanjali said. And he was referring to default mode network. That is being awareness of what is the mind doing when it is not doing anything. That is alpha state. But when you go into a deep meditative state, you get into alpha. And it is a state of, it is a resting ready state, being aware of what the mind is doing. It is awareness of inside world and outside world. You are aware of both in and out. And referring to mindfulness is be now here,
Yes.
nowhere. And the now here is, it is awareness of breath. Totally, whether it is mindfulness or meditation or yoga, it all refers to being aware of breath. And see, once you become aware of the breath slows down. Normally, when a person who is, say, in a restful state, the breath slows down to nearly 8 or 12. And when you go into an advanced state of meditation, the breath stops. You watch yourself breathless. I have been doing an advanced Kriya Yoga. I had taken initiation from Mahadar Babaji's lineage of Yoga Satsang. And when you sit in meditation, it is a total state of stillness, body stillness and mind stillness. Thought stops, breath stops. You watch yourself breathless. And when you become aware of your breathless state, oh, I have not breathed for a time, you start breathing and you enjoy that. It is bliss. I wanted to subject myself for an MRI and see that what happens. That is, it is experience that you communicate. There is a intercerebral communication.
Yes.
It balances it, yin and yang, right and left. This left is logical, rational, reasoning brain, whereas right is creative and intuitive. And when you go into a deep state, the communication becomes better and you become balanced.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. In fact, B.K. Iyengar in his book says the first definition of yoga in the Ahirbudnya Samhita says Samyoga Yoga Ityukto Jivatma Paramatmanaha. But he says that because of the modern world, we have dumbed down the definition, and now yoga has become, anything that you do, some exercise has become yoga. So he says very nicely, the first definition refers to this ability to join universal consciousness. Even Carl Jung actually ultimately started talking about that. There is a universal consciousness which we all can join, provided we are prepared for that. So that is the yoga, the ultimate ideal of yoga. The other things are all what you call side effects or additional effects. You get better fitness, you get so many immune parameters, they're all, but the ultimate aim is exactly what you're saying, sir.
And be still and know I am God.
Yes, thank you, sir.
This is Swaminath from Bangalore. One of the main issues by yoga is not widely accepted is the absence of an evidence base. And the reason, according to me, is that there is enough of evidence of yoga being helpful in various mental disorders. But the operational yoga, which was being tried by various researchers, has been different. Like you showed that SKY.
Yes.
Sudarshan Kriya Yoga is one of the very intelligently produced package on yoga,
Yes.
which has all the components, including Brahmari, which you told. Whereas others have been using various other types of things, and none of them are common. So the definition of yoga for research has been one of the bugbears because of which this replicability and evidence base has not occurred in yoga research.
Yes.
And I think this module which NIMHANS has produced, I would say that you have to take the leadership role in ensuring that the boundaries between yoga researchers is reduced so that everyone uses a single model.
Yes. Yes.
So that everywhere, the replicability can be both at NIMHANS or at Banaras or at SVIASA or wherever. The same module is used, the same things, operationally, everything becomes so correct. Like we have what is called inter-rater reliability in
Yes, yes.
psychological research. The same thing might have to be done for yoga research, and that will help us to produce a good evidence base for yoga. And that's one problem. The second problems which was there in research, which again you showed, is that outcome measures have been we don't have good outcome measures to identify the improvement. Whereas, therefore, one of the things which have occurred in NIMHANS was the excellent, production. I don't get the right word, but outcome measures like facial recognition for social cognition, all of those things were first to be identified, and then using yoga as a means to see whether improvement has occurred in these things was there. My question is, where do you think we are going ahead, and where do you think we will be in the next 5 years?
Thank you, sir, for the points. Regarding the first point, I think it's very important. Most of the previous research on yoga is not considered as high quality simply because of this fact that they either have patented the yoga module like the Art of Living People, or that hot yoga kind of person in the US where it's been commercialized. So we are very, very clear that we talk of generic yoga. We publish the whole module. Anybody wants to do research on it, they're very welcome to it. We share it with anybody who wants to use it for their patients. We put it on our website, absolutely no problem. The only condition we make is that it should not be self-taught. There has to be somebody to teach you, because that person should know whether it is good for you, not good for you. For example, long meditation is not good for psychotic patients. It can worsen the psychosis simply because they sort of go into that state and then they focus on what is inside. Biologically also, meditation is also a hyperdopaminergic state, and so is psychosis. So the yoga, the teacher should know what is good for this person, what is not good. Just like our medicines, what we prescribe are available in the pharmacy, but the person doesn't go to the pharmacy, they come to us because we know what is good and what is not good. Similarly, it should be taught by somebody who has learned yoga properly. So we only put a condition that please don't self-teach, get to a yoga professional, you can use this module. And we are also running certificate courses on yoga for mental health for two kinds of population. One is mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, social work, and also for yoga professionals to teach them what is good for schizophrenia, what is not good for depression, what is good for anxiety. So we have run almost 4 courses. For the yoga professionals, it's a full 1 month physical course where they come, they see our yoga modules, they teach yoga to our patients. And the second part of your question is also very important, that there has to be a way of saying this person has learned the yoga properly. Now, I prescribe risperidone 4 mg. I don't know whether he's taking it. Now we can do a blood level to see whether actually he's taking risperidone. Similarly, we use what we call as a yoga performance assessment, where at the end of the training, the yoga therapist says, okay, this patient has learned how to do this yoga. He's able to do it without, or she is able to do it without much supervision. That is otherwise you don't even know whether the person has understood what you have said or learned. This is something lacking in most yoga research. They say yoga did not work, yoga worked, whatever it is. But has the actually patient learned the yoga? You have to have a tool for that. So we are trying to make, like you said, outcome measures, tools to measure. And tele yoga, for example, is not a big thing. Everything is on tele. And you don't even know whether the person has heard you properly, is able to do it. So there also we have a written paper, how to evaluate whether the person has learned the yoga properly. Technology can help us there. Regarding your question, what I feel is that if more and more scientific people come to yoga, then we will be able to actually succeed in making yoga as a proper therapy. On the other hand, if we leave it to Babas and we leave it to people who are not scientists, then nothing much is going to change. So it is the science people who have to come and say, okay, with an open mind, as Dr. R.S. Pandey always used to say, I do yoga just to show that it doesn't work. It's good, no problem. Such people should also come into yoga. If I go into yoga with the prior idea that yoga helps everything, my research is going to be biased. So you have to have science. Then, because Patanjali is extremely scientific. He says, what are the ways to see what has the effect on your body, on your mind? In between, we have lost the science, we have retained it as a ritual. We do so many rituals every day because our grandfather told us, grandmother told us. Somebody recently talked about, this 14-day period in COVID. When in India, when people die, 14 days, nobody else comes to the family. We do a lot of cleaning procedures. Why is that? It must have been because of some viral illness or something which, the family is already affected, so they are okay, but relatives should not come to the house. The family should not go to the temple. They should not go to public areas. Why is that? There was a science behind it. Now we have lost the science. It has become a ritual, 13th day, 14th day ceremony. So we have to relearn this science behind all these things. Whether it is yoga, whether it is Ayurveda, we have to take the science and then it will go. And I'm fairly sure that if that happens, like Dr. Valiyathan has got into Ayurveda, some people who are good at scientific research to come into the yoga field. They may disprove some of the yoga. Excellent, no problem. What works, what does not work has to be identified. If that happens, I'm fairly sure in the next 5 years, yoga will take its place along with so many other therapies that we have as a scientific treatment.
Yes, sir. Hi, I'm Dr. Shiv Prakash with SCARF, and so I've seen firsthand the effect that you had shown of the work that you've done with SCARF already. And you've already answered this question, and this is something that I wanted to also reiterate. Yoga is not a Sarvaroga Nivarani. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And as you very rightly said, that we might have to make it more specific, which is why, even though that slide pointed out pretty much every single diagnosis in the DSM and ICD, it's not take Risperidone and it's not a rubber stamp for everything. The second part is actually my work happens mostly with young people. So 12 to 25-year-olds. And one of the key things is convincing young people to take up yoga or anything similar to yoga is a very hard sell.
Extremely difficult.
So I get it. After a point of time, people will say the most that I can do is yoga. It's almost like a waste basket, like this is all that I can do. But how in your work, in people who do not have severe mental illnesses, do you get young people to engage in something like yoga? Because as you very rightly said, these effects are not even short term. There is evidence for long-term effects of yoga, and the BDNF changes, the neuroplasticity, these are long-term effects. Yes. These aren't like I did it today and it happened tomorrow, but these persist. So getting them to get trained earlier on in life as either a health promotive or even as a treatment method, how have you been able to engage with young people?
Very good question, Dr. Shiv Prakash. I heard your name mentioned by Dr. Suresh Kumar that you are a child psychiatrist. There are two aspects to this answer. One is children do not do what they are told to. They do what they see other people doing. Like the digital things now, children are so comfortable. So it's only by convincing the seniors in the family that the children will do. It's simply impossible to say, you do yoga or you go jogging, nobody else in the family is doing anything. Simply not going to happen. You change your diet, you don't eat this food, it's not good for you. His sister is eating, his father is eating, simply not going to happen. So that is why I was saying the mothers in the house are the primary people who have to change, and again, this concept of yoga being a very tough thing to do, very complicated, needing dress, mat, that whole thing. You can do yoga very well, comfortably sitting on a chair, 15 minutes of meditation a day. If people start doing, I have seen it in my personal thing that initially, like you said, they are very yoga. I mean, as if it's some only Baba Ramdev can do yoga. When they see their parents doing it and saying that I am much more calmer today, then they do it by themselves. So I find it very difficult to convince children of anything. They have to be convinced themselves. You just say these are the options. The second aspect to that answer is, again, it has to become scientific. Like gym, for example. Now you see many of our younger people, they go to the gym regularly. Why do they do it? Because they see it everywhere. They see it as a science. Whereas yoga is seen as very esoteric or some kind of a religious. It's not. Absolutely, it is not religious. So these two, if you are combining, that the seniors start doing it rather than talking about it, and that it is projected as a science rather than a cult or a religion. In that sense, many of the Babas have actually done a disservice to yoga by saying it is something that you can only learn from me and only I can teach you. And absolutely not. You have to democratize knowledge, and it has to be accessible to the everybody. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing in India is that the urban areas, people are very keen to try out Ayurveda yoga. Rural, nobody cares. Whereas actually it is there that we need to do majority of the work. That is why my hope is that this so-called wellness centers, which the center is talking about, will have this component there. You know, people in Bangalore come searching for our yoga center. People in Brazil have come searching for it. Whereas a person in Ramnagara, I go and talk to them. We published a recent this thing saying they're not interested because they have simply haven't heard of yoga as being a science. Yoga is something that is done by somebody living in the forest. You know, that is the impression. So that we have to correct. So if we are able to do that, then only I think it has a good future. Otherwise, it will remain like it has always been. So it had to say it is a science.
I'm Dr. Ashok Reddy from Hyderabad.
Yes, sir.
So yoga is used both for health as well as therapy, predominantly
Yes.
as health as of now.
Yes.
And you have talked about the modules for various conditions. What about the response time in comparison with antidepressants? Like if we start antidepressants, it takes 10 to 14 days to show the response.
Yes.
So are there any studies or evidences to show the response time in various illnesses?
Very good question, sir. Two things. One, what we have found is for yoga to have any effect, minimum is 3 to 4 days a week, just like medicine. You know, you take medicine once a week, unlikely to really work. As regards the onset of action, what we have found is rather than the time, it's the number of sessions. We feel a minimum of 10 sessions is required for anything really to happen. You might pick up neurobiological things within 5 sessions, but for clinical improvement, for example, opioid dependence, we get a lot of patients who come for yoga with opioid dependence. After around 10 or 12 sessions, sleep, these things start better. Then they start believing, then they start doing it properly. And it's also true that to learn the yoga which is required, most people take around 5-6 sessions. Unlike medicine, it is a very active thing. Person has to do it rather than just take something. Which is actually in one way good because it empowers the person to think, I am doing something for my illness, not just taking a medicine which the doctor has given. So maybe 10 sessions is what I would say. It can be done in 5 days. You do 2 sessions a day, maybe 5 days. And secondly, the important thing is at least 3 or 4 days a week has to happen. What we have found in our research, there's no research from outside India also, which shows a single yoga session leaves biological effects for up to 7 or 8 days. After that, it goes away. You do 3 times a week for 6 months, then only you start getting the real neurobiological changes, which we have shown. So it just like medicines, it will take time. But hopefully this is something that the person will continue to do, which is why I'm stressing on the point that it has to be made easy for the person. You say you have to do this 1 hour every day, you have to do exactly at 90 degrees, nobody is going to do it. So don't worry about how much you're able to stretch, don't cross the pain barrier. You focus on being comfortable in this position. People will do it. That's what we have found. And surprisingly, we have found actually, sir, that the more severe patients are easily the ones which continue. Possibly because they are desperate, schizophrenia, severe depression, they come back. Anxiety people, extremely difficult to catch hold of. Today they do yoga, tomorrow they try something else, day after tomorrow ketamine, go to some other new doctor who promises some new treatment. It's very difficult to catch hold of this, the well population. It's actually the more severe because our major research on schizophrenia and depression simply because they come for follow. So I feel that if you can convince a person to try it for up to say at least a month, after that they will do it themselves. That first month is very difficult, as Dr. Shiv Prakash was also pointing out. Yeah.
My experience is the way to make people get interested in yoga is not to put any conditions. The way I tell the people, teach people is there are no conditions in this. You can do it anytime, anywhere, any length of time. So I'm not going to put 15 minutes or 20 minutes. If you can do for 2 minutes, okay. But not necessarily you should do it only in the mornings. You can do it anytime, whenever you want, in whatever position you want, whether lying down or sitting or standing. So when there are no conditions, people are inclined to accept. And again, say 15 minutes or 30 minutes of yoga, whatever you say, for a beginner or for a patient or for a normal person, it is not, probably you are not doing it right. My master used to say, if you are doing for 30 minutes of yoga, it is not meditation, it is mental meditation. You go inside and keep dreaming about. So that is not. I tell the people or whomever I teach, I tell them, just do it for 2 minutes. If you can do it for 5 minutes, you will be a great saint. It is impossible to stop the mind. So maybe you start with 1 minute. At that 1 minute, I give the basic of yoga is watching the breath coming up and going in. If you can keep watching it for a minute, you feel, and actually, when you're going to watch the breath, the breathing stops. There will be pause between inspiration and expiration. That pause is that bliss. How long you are going to have a go hold the bliss, whether it's 2 seconds or 3 seconds. Instead of normal 18-20 breaths, it becomes 12. Even as a beginner, even in a hall, you can demonstrate. The breathing becomes, when you start watching that, you will be finding the gap. And that bliss, the purpose is to increase the gap. The breathing becomes slower. So within 2 minutes, your mind wanders somewhere. You have to bring it back. Oh, this time I have to watch the breath come. And that is the way, gradually, if you're going to do it, you extend the time. The time stretches. After 20 years, I'm able to sit for only 1 hour. I want to sit for 2 hours. It's not possible. Maybe if you can increase 2 minutes or 3 minutes over 1 month, it is big. So 30 minutes of meditation, don't tell anybody. Don't tell them to do it for 20 minutes. Tell them to do it for 5 minutes. And these 5 minutes, you can do it anytime, anywhere. Not necessarily in the morning gap. Whenever you find gap, I tell the people, whenever I don't have to talk to anybody, whenever I don't have to see anything, I just go into meditation. And so meditation or yoga, it is a way of being, not one of doing. So that is it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. I'm Dr. Christina Joyce from Coimbatore, sir. I'm basically a Siddha medicine physician, and I have done my postgraduate in psychology. So I just want to know whether we can add the Siddha medicine of system into this integrated practice of mental health. Just want to know about your ideas.
I don't know much about Siddha medicine, but as far as I'm aware, it is almost the herbal part of Ayurveda. It goes deep into the herbal part and does not have the other chemicals, which some of these heavy metals and other things.
No, sir. It is having a herbal and along with that metals, heavy metals, everything. Yeah, is it?
So basically, it's like Ayurveda.
Yeah,
only.
it's like Ayurveda, but its origin is from Tamil Nadu.
Yes.
Then we are having a separate division for yoga also. That's why you was talking about this integrative way of treatment, right?
Yes.
So you didn't mention anything about Siddha. I'm sorry.
That's because I have not done any work on that.
Yeah, sir.
So
I
should
just
not
want to know.
talk about things which I don't know much about. So Ayurveda is again, like I said, a very recent thing. But what my Ayurveda colleagues have told me is that Siddha is very much almost like Ayurveda, but it is a specialized form which is from Tamil Nadu. And it's very much possible because I think even in your Siddha course, you are taught about yoga.
Yes,
Isn't
of
it?
course.
So Ayurveda also, they have a basic training in yoga. And unfortunately, what has happened in the MBBS, it is not there. So that's what exactly I'm saying. The MBBS person also needs to know what is yoga. He may practice it, he may not practice it. I don't do surgery, but I know what is surgery. isn't it? I am not a surgeon. So we have to get this concept of learning about, say, for example, you ask me about Siddha, I don't know anything because nobody has ever taught me. Right? We need to have something in a medical course. Siddha person should know about allopathy a little bit. He may not practice it, but he needs to know. That is what I mean about democratization of knowledge. Right? So MBBS person should know what is Ayurveda. Is it good? Is it bad? Okay, should I refer somebody to Ayurveda, some particular, for example, homeopathy. Homeopathy works brilliantly in allergic conditions, right? So it may be a very good treatment, but it may not have any evidence in schizophrenia. So we should at least know these things, and very much possible that you can integrate, especially if you have a psychology background, definitely you can do it.
Okay, so and thank you for your answer. And I have one more question. Is there any possibility to do this integrated course? I mean, for my thing, I'm asking.
Yes. I mean,
yes.
this certificate course what we run for yoga is meant for people like you only. And you have both qualifications. You are a Siddha as well as a psychology background. You can very definitely do it. Please look at our website. When we run the next course, you can come.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. It's not working, sir. Mic. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
So we had a wonderful session, and then the questions have been coming really hard and fast. But there's some basic issues which have to be addressed. What do we mean by yoga? I mean, the Ashtanga part. See, even, I think about a few years ago in Trichy, I think a similar topic was spoken. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was the chairperson there also, and I raised this particular question. What is yoga? Is it asana only, or, pranayama plus dhyana? What happens with dharana? These questions, unless, I'm just, inclined to say that don't call it yoga at all. Give it another name where you mean it's only asana, meditation, and pranayama, so that you know what you're talking about. Because specificity in the nomenclature is very important, which is a basic part of science.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going on. If you ask, I'll go on.
Yes, sir.
So we'll have a personal discussion.
Sure, sir.
Okay, it's been a wonderful session, and we have been enlightened by Shirama. It's been, it's his lifetime, and I hope he pursues it to the extreme and make something out of it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
So at the end of the session, we have to present the best questions who asks this in this session. Okay. Dr. Swaminathan from Bangalore. It has to be given by the, our chief guest.
Very happy, sir. You get an opportunity to. One of the few persons who keeps actually doing what he talks about.
Thank you, sir. I call upon Dr. Ashok Reddy, sir, to hand over the memento to our chairpersons, Dr. S. Rajkumar and Dr. V. Vishwanathan, sir. Sir. Thank you, sir. Now I welcome Dr. R. Rajkumar, sir, and Dr. G. Vishwanathan, sir, to deliver the memento to Dr. Shri Varma Varmapal. Thank you, sir. I request all the dignitaries to attend the next session on Hall A. It's a theme session.